Hey, what's up? I'm Brian Drake here on the Dice Tower. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're taking a look at three figures from Knight Models. They have three different miniatures games that they do. They have a DC Universe, a Batman Universe one, and then a Harry Potter miniatures game. So we're taking a look at three different miniatures, one from each set, giving you a couple of simple tips to really elevate your painting beyond the basics. Small things that you can put in practice, and you can see how they look on the figures that I did. And then coming up pretty soon, we have a full review of the Dark Knight Rises beginner set, basic set, starter set that comes with Bane, Batman, Tumbler, everything, and also some really cool buildings, 3D buildings. So we'll take a look at that in a little bit. But right now, let's take a look at how I painted these figures, how they turned out, what they look like, and if you should take a look at these figures as well.
So first things first, we're going to do some assembling. A lot of Knight Models figures have to be assembled. Now, one interesting thing to note is you can use baking soda as a catalyst to speed up the drying time or bonding time of superglue. So just know that's a thing. Now, when it comes to priming, you have several different options. Now, if you're using an airbrush system, obviously that's one way to do this. But if you're on the cheap, like me, you can go to Walmart and get some Rust-Oleum, for goodness sakes. Now, there are other brands that you can use, but we're going to prime the figures all in black first. Make sure you get it from every angle, and again, get that low angle too, because a lot of these figures have some good underside details that will be visible if you don't prime them, and obviously make things more difficult. We're then going to take straight white from a 90-degree angle. This is what's called zenithal highlights. This basically gives the example, or gives the impression that there's light above shining down on the subject. And look what that does. It instantly naturally highlights these figures to look a certain way. It takes a lot of the work out of the highlights that we have to do later when it comes to painting.
So with Batwoman, it's a little bit different because normally with a figure this small, I wouldn't do the zenithal highlights. I would just do prime and all white. But you'll notice on the figure here, there's a lot of light we're dealing with, plus this interesting look for this goblin-looking sort of gargoyle. So the idea here is when you're doing highlights and you're trying to make your figure look interesting, now you can paint the figure all flat colors, but when you're trying to make it look interesting, the best thing to do is to try to find where your source of light is coming from. So she's standing on top of a building, so technically the only way this could really be happening was to imagine a searchlight off of a helicopter shining down. I mean, you could have done downlight coming up from a building, but it wouldn't look as dynamic on the character necessarily. I mean, it would, but it's just a little off sometimes to paint your light colors on the bottom and highlight down that way. But if we imagine that she's standing on top of a gargoyle and there's a light hitting her from this angle pointing down from some sort of like I say, like a helicopter or something like that.
There are a lot of different types of paints to use, different brands, different technical compounds as well. But the main thing is to get a coat of paint, your base colors, and then highlight either up or down from there when it comes to what you're doing. So right here, we're taking the gray color for Bruce Wayne, for Batman's legs and his body, you know, the kind of the gray areas, not the black or the blue areas, depending on how you wanted to paint this. Now, you could have painted this as a black caped Batman, but the picture shows the blue, kind of the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams era. So what you're going to do is you're going to basically just be painting light, thin coats of paint for your base colors. Now, in order to get highlights and to get depth on the character, we're going to have to do more than just put some base coats on. So currently we're putting just base coats of gray. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lighten up the shade of gray with maybe some white or some lighter gray. And we're going to go consecutively thin layers. Make sure your paint is thin, not too thin to where it runs everywhere. It's hard to explain because people want to say things like skim milk, and that just is really kind of hard to tell. You'll know when the paint's right. Just build up consecutive thin layers to make it look like things are getting lighter and lighter. Now, the zenithal highlights that we did are already going to help you out. But one other thing that really helps technique is to paint the same direction with your brush as you build these microscopic layers higher and higher, lighter and lighter, to get that natural look of the light hitting it. You'll also want to shrink your area that you're painting for the highlight to really bring out that look of depth. We're then going to move over to the blue. Now the blue, we're using a Cantor blue with Citadel's paints. Now what you can do is the same thing. You're just basically going to put a thin layer of base coat on. Now the blue is interesting because we have so many areas that were hit with the black primer, but not the white because of the underside of the cape. a lot of the work's going to be done for you in getting these areas to be darkened like they should be, as if he were flying in the shadows like this. But we also want to make sure to put some edge highlights on the blue, which you'll see in the final product, which basically that means you take the final color of blue, and we're going to keep building this blue color up and up and up, lighter and lighter. So you're going to be adding lighter and lighter colored paints to it, which for me, I use some Baharoth blue, some edge blue, just to lighten it lighter and lighter and lighter. And on these flatter areas, you can feather the edges by taking a wet brush or a damp brush. And as you put the new color on, you just dampen the brush and just feather the edges, literally making them blend naturally into the color right below them. It saves you a lot, and it makes your blends look a lot more even as you do this. The last technique, and you'll see what we're doing here, is just constantly building layers, building layers. It's slow, but it is therapeutic after a while if you enjoy it, doing this for your own figures especially. It's something because you're making your pieces look better and nicer. Especially get the edges, get places where light's definitely going to hit naturally. And again, our highlights already tell us that. As you get brighter and brighter with the color, you can do what's called edge highlighting, which is where we'll take the brightest highlight, maybe even white. Sometimes it's a very edge highlight blue, like a very, very light blue, and just take the brush sideways and put it across some of the areas that stand out. Now, another technique is dry brushing. This is how you get some raised areas to be colorful, like in the smoke down there. You'll take a light gray or something and just get most of the paint off of it and just go across it over and over.
So this is the completed product here for Batman, and this is what you want. You really want those muscles to stand out. Put enough highlighting in there to where you see the definition of the muscles. Now, one of my favorite things that it's hard to see on here is forehead. It's done comic book style. I did the shape that you see in most comic books, but this is just such a dynamic figure. Edge highlighting here really brings out the inside of the cape, makes it look nice and like it snaps. The smoke itself is really easy because you're going to basically put that dark color like I showed you, and then you're just going to dry brush some lighter colored over the top. And then the bats, I didn't even wash the bats or anything like that. And the same thing back here, you're going to just highlight up the cape and feather it in to make it look as nice as possible. And again, from tabletop size, this is a beautiful figure. I'm going to be using this all over the place, just in the DC game, but also in other things that I need a Batman for.
Now let's move over to Dumbledore. We're going to be doing some interesting techniques with Dumbledore. One of them would be called wet blending, which is basically mixing paints that are wet still together to get a nice gradient between them. This will obviously happen with our fire. So naturally we're going to paint the base colors. We're going to get some nice light blues and purples for his robes. You can kind of see the image what his robes should look like from the front of the box, but here's the thing. As you're building up your highlights and you're going to be adding lighter purples and lighter blues, it's interesting to note, look at the picture on the front of the box and note what areas are going to be affected by the light of his fire. And as you build up the highlights, you're going to add some purple. As you're building up the highlights of the purple, you're going to add some orange into those areas to show that area as being bright.
So we've got the beginning stages of the fire done here with a wet blend from yellow to orange to dark smoky red. You could do other colors if you want. Already did the object source lighting on Dumbledore. It's all going to come together when everything finishes, but and I'm going to touch up some of these spots right here in his purple. But the idea is just to get color on there that makes it look like the light source is hitting him from whatever side it's coming from. So we have it coming from two sides here, which is why his face has got some splashes of color, as well as the side of the robe over here. The rocks we're going to hit and make them look nice. We'll do some edge highlighting on there to make it look like they're just absolutely ripping hot, and we'll do the same thing with the fire. We're actually going to give some edge highlights into the fire to make it look even hotter in the orange and the yellow.
Basically taking one wet color, putting it on a good bit of the model, and then painting another wet color, and then taking your brush and dragging the paints into each other to make a nice gradient. What we're doing here is we're just going to finish those, that wet blending, and then add a smoky wash to kind of make the fire look a little bit darker and smokier, like it's burning a little cooler or damper because of the air.
So there we go. We got object source lighting all over the inferi there. We got it on Dumbledore's clothes, on the rocks, and then some smoky colors added to the paint, to the fire, to make it look like it's just kind of a dark, smoky fire like in the movie.
So here's the final products for all of them. You can see just the techniques kind of really come together to take something, just a hunk of plastic, and make it look really beautiful. And then you can see the highlighting there with Batwoman. But that's all there is to it, just taking your pieces and making them look better.
So first and foremost, these figures look incredible. The Night models sculpts themselves are fantastically done. Now, if you compare them to other types of miniatures of the same genre, so if you took the Batman Monolith game, for instance, and put it next to the Batman Night Models game, you'll notice they're both expertly crafted, but they're done differently in style. The scale for the Batman and DC and Harry Potter game is a very realistic scale. So what you're seeing is the head shapes are pretty normal human being head shapes. So that makes them a little bit smaller for painting. And if you paint a little bit, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. But you've seen some of the Fantasy Flight miniatures and even some of the Simon miniatures have kind of bigger features for heads and hands and things like that, so that you can paint them. And so they kind of stand out on the table, but they don't quite have human proportions in a sense. But these have a very realistic human proportion. So ups and downs of that are gluing. For gluing hands, gluing heads on, it's a little bit trickier. So make sure that you have, some tweezers and a magnifying glass to get it right in place. If you have to use a little baking soda as a catalyst, do that to get it to stick exactly how you like it. But overall, these are gorgeous looking miniatures. Now, as far as painting them, you kind of saw the techniques that we did. Main things I wanted to focus on in this one were the zenithal highlights. That alone can change your painting so much, because you waste so much less or so little time on trying to highlight up, because you already have the highlights built in from the priming. So just know that that's a great technique, especially when working with superheroes who have muscles and downlight and all that sort of stuff. Another one would be the wet blending, taking 3 colors or 2 colors or how many colors you're doing, putting some glaze medium is what I do to keep it wet, putting some of the first color down, especially with the fire. We did yellow on the bottom, we did a red on top, and then we did a bit of orange in the middle, and then we just drag the paintbrush into each other to where you get this nice gradient of yellow to red, and then we put some brown tips on the smokiness in there. But that's basically it for this time. So if you want to see more of these Night Models figures, go check out their website, Night Models. They have some amazing, amazing looking stuff, as well as some great games. We'll be taking a look at how the game's played pretty soon. But that's it for this time. I'm Brian Drake here on the Dice Tower. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram, all that. Until next time, I'll see you. That's at the latest retro, I should tell you that. I'll see you.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at DicetowerNetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower